This is Brian, a teen, and this clip made him a viral YouTube star overnight. It's a vintage self-taped audition for director Stanley Kubrick's 1987 war drama, Full Metal Jacket. Like countless male actors his age, the word that Kubrick was assembling a new film about young men at war, after being away from the screen for 7 years no less, was enough to send a teen into a frothed-mouth frenzy, throwing caution, restraint, and good taste to the wind in a bid to win a coveted spot in Kubrick's cast. This collective, self-taped hysteria for a prestigious director's new war film was surpassed only by the hysteria that accompanied Terrence Malick's decision to make The Thin Red Line after a 20-year absence from cinema screens. Nevertheless, a teen's unbelievable audition video reveals two very important things about Kubrick as an artist. The first is that he was one of the first directors to have a rabid fan base. The second is that said fan base could never quite pin down Kubrick's artistic intentions, or predict how he would approach a given subject. With the benefit of hindsight, we can see that a teen's choice to perform a melodramatic soliloquy from Francis Ford Coppola's The Outsiders was a catastrophically poor one given the grim, cynical tone of Kubrick's finished product. A teen couldn't possibly have known this, however. We easily forget that up until the late 60s and early 70s, war films were lush, glossy epics featuring romantic, idealistic leads fighting for truth and good. Modern war films portray war as the living hell on earth that it actually is, and Full Metal Jacket's unflinching vision of combat's toll on the human psyche can be credited as a crucial turning point in the genre. The experience of the Vietnam War had soured America on the prospect of warfare, mostly because the widespread adoption of television allowed the war to be broadcast into the homes of every family, punctuating their supper with gunfire, explosions, and the anguished cries of wounded men. Kubrick felt a desire to make a war film that reflected this new paradigm, and selected author Gustav Hasford's 1979 novel The Short Timers as the source material upon which he had based the story for what would eventually become Full Metal Jacket. Working once again with his brother-in-law and producing partner Jan Harlan, Kubrick recruited a novelist and Vietnam veteran named Michael Herr to help him craft the script. The shoot audaciously faked rural England for the humid jungles of Vietnam, with the production timetable ballooning longer than a standard tour of duty. Where most actors and craftsmen would quit in anger over the prolonged schedule, this element of Kubrick's shooting style had become so well known by this point that his collaborators willingly signed on, knowing full well it would inevitably happen. They placed their utmost faith and confidence in Kubrick, and that trust and passion showed through in the final product. Full Metal Jacket may be a flawed, uneven film, but that can't stop it from enduring as one of the defining films in the war genre, as well as Kubrick's own body of work. In an attempt to do away with conventional modes of cinematic structure, Kubrick employs a two-act structure in Full Metal Jacket. The first half takes place at a military base in South Carolina, where a band of new recruits are being trained to become the latest wave of efficient killing machines. The film's second half is set in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive, one of the defining moments of the war. Kubrick's cast is comprised entirely of unknowns, and is a testament to their talents here that they all went on to respectable acting careers afterwards. Matthew Modine headlines the film as the gangly Joker, a mischievous subversive who pairs his military fatigues with a peace symbol decal, which makes his story arc of lost innocence all the more potent. He carries a smug grin on his face throughout the entirety of the film, but you better believe that by film's end, Kubrick will have wiped it right off his face. Vincent D'Onofrio makes his film debut in Full Metal Jacket as the fat, uncoordinated Gomer Pyle. He purportedly gained 70 pounds to play the role, offering a hint of those dedicated thespian affectations his career would later be known for. The real star of the show, however, is R. Lee Ermey, who plays the hard-ass drill sergeant Hartman. Prior to the film, Ermey was a real-life retired Marine drill sergeant, and was brought onto the project as a tech consultant. His dedication to authenticity was so intense that he outright stole the role of Hartman from the guy who had originally been cast. His relentless abuse and creative grasp on insulting profanity approaches the level of performance art, and his particular showing in Full Metal Jacket kick-started a second career as an in-demand character actor that continues to this day. By this point in his career, Kubrick had built up a strong working relationship with cinematographer John Alcott, who shot his previous 3 features. When Kubrick began to assemble his crew for Full Metal Jacket, Alcott declined a fourth go-round with the Maverick auteur. In hindsight, this would prove to be a serendipitous move for both parties, considering Alcott died during the middle of production. Douglas Milsom, who had previously worked on Kubrick's films as a focus puller, stepped up to assume the role instead. Milsom and Kubrick craft a relatively straightforward visual presentation that's high on style, but low on flash. Kubrick's compositions retain his signature one-point perspectives, which emphasize depth and symmetry, while his camera work builds on The Shining's innovations with the Steadicam by incorporating it as often as possible. Kubrick has always favored extended tracking shots as a way to convey mood, and the rise of the Steadicam allowed him much greater flexibility and versatility in that regard. No longer bound by dolly tracks, he could mount the camera on a Steadicam rig and follow his subjects right into the maelstrom, without so much of a hint of handheld jitter. Like Barry Lyndon or The Shining before it, Kubrick counters the formalism of his camera work with new wave techniques, like slow zooms and flash cuts. Full Metal Jacket's naturalistic aesthetic isn't as lurid or evocative of other Vietnam classics, like Oliver Stone's Platoon, or Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, yet its visuals are just as, if not more, iconic, due to Kubrick's legendary eye for composition and considered movement. The music of Full Metal Jacket marks an abrupt departure for Kubrick, who is well known for using prominent classical works to accompany his visuals instead of original scores. Instead of Baroque concertos, Kubrick opts for the iconic sound of the Vietnam War, rock and roll.
Goodbye, my darling.
Beginning with Johnny Wright's crooning country ballad, Hello Vietnam, Kubrick uses an inspired selection of late 70s era rock music to reflect the dark, subversive, and unpredictable nature of Vietnam's combatants. A particular standout is the use of the Rolling Stones' Painted Black over the end credits, a musical echo of the darkness that Joker now dwells in after the completion of his character arc. Despite the heavy presence of rock cues, Kubrick does make potent use of an original score written by his daughter, Vivian Kubrick, credited here as Abigail Mead. Vivian creates a suitably foreboding, industrial sound using electronic instruments that appropriately reflect Kubrick's pitch-black portrait of institutionalized destruction. While Kubrick's films defy easy explanation, they can be distilled into the examination of two primal opposing forces, violence and sex. His last two films, Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut, would become companion pieces in that they each dealt with their respective theme, violence for the former, sex for the latter. Kubrick was no stranger to war films, but whereas Paths of Glory dealt with the ethical conundrums of warfare on a collective scale, Full Metal Jacket is more concerned with the psychological consequences of warfare on the level of the individual. The film focuses on the military as an institution, not only capable of perpetrating man's inhumanity towards his fellow man, but one that needs such devastation in order to thrive. Kubrick doesn't depict the military so much as an institution, but as a machine, devouring countless scores of boys whole and spitting them out the other end as robotic killing machines devoid of compassion and empathy. The machine is kept fed by a surrounding culture that commodifies and glorifies violence. Joker's iconic line,
"I wanted to be the first kid on my block to get a confirmed kill,"
is terrifying precisely because it hits so close to home. By film's end, we are left only with one question: what is the cost of warfare? Kubrick's thesis posits that the answer lies not in the form of dollars, but in our very souls. Vietnam was more than just a war for the American public. It was an existential crisis that introduced the idea of cynicism and irony into warfare. It was, for lack of a better term, the hipster war. Having peppered it throughout his filmography to extremely potent effect, Kubrick was no stranger to the concept of irony, and Full Metal Jacket is stuffed to the brim with it. The big bad sniper of the film's climax is revealed to be a scared 12-year-old girl. Soldiers march against fiery scenes of devastation, while cheerily singing the Mickey Mouse Club theme song. A young recruit is trained into such an effective killing machine that he turns his rifle on the man who created him. Full Metal Jacket came out the same year that Oliver Stone's Platoon did, and while Kubrick's final statement on war and violence would eventually lose out the Best Picture Oscar to Stone's breakout film, it now overshadows its former rival due to the legacy of its genius creator. It may not be the definitive Vietnam film, but it is certainly one of the most definitive films of the war genre. For Kubrick himself, Full Metal Jacket serves as a fitting, yet haunting conclusion to a topic that he spent a lifetime exploring.